Worried? Well, maybe you should be. At the moment, the worry list appears endless and constantly changing. Amid the chaos, it's tempting to throw up our hands and say, what's the use? EDC Economics' Top 10 Global Risks is aimed at focusing exporters on the possible threats that should be of greatest concern. Change is an omnipresent mantra, ranging from disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence to the varied impacts of climate change. One consequence of the pace of change is that citizens from Brazil to Hungary are electing populist governments and providing them with a mandate to upend the status quo. This trend has birthed and grown a new wave of global protectionism. One glaring manifestation of this number one risk is the current trade war between the United States and China, which is not only having repercussions on both economies, but also pumping the brakes on worldwide growth. If it escalates, it could have long-term effects on future investment, global supply chains, and trade flows. While any change in the international trading system would be costly for Canadian companies, most eyes remain transfixed on our neighbor to the south. The risk of Fortress America has dropped to number 2, given the US, Canada, and Mexico signing of a new trade agreement towards the end of 2018. However, we aren't out of the doghouse yet. The renegotiated Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, or CUSMA, has yet to be ratified by member governments, and tariffs remain in place on Canadian steel and aluminum tariffs. Despite threats to global growth posed by the top 2 risks, the U.S. has been the stalwart and at times sole engine of global growth. However, there is growing concern that a self-inflicted global recession could be coming. While we maintain that growth fundamentals are strong, trade policy mayhem is interrupting planet-wide investment plans crucial to securing future growth. Moving up our list this year is the risk surrounding Brexit, and specifically the likelihood of no agreement being reached on the impending withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union by the end of March. As the window for a deal closes rapidly, uncertainty is rising and the possibility of a chaotic exit or a delay is growing. For Canadian exporters, this raises key questions such as maintaining access to the UK market and the sustainability of agreements with the EU. Companies are already having to put their contingency plans into action. As the UK lifts the drawbridge to Europe, with or without a deal, America is pulling back from its place in the world. The risk of U.S. isolationism that produces a geopolitical void is moving closer to reality as America withdraws from its global leadership position. On countless issues from trade to the environment to security, Washington has indicated it would take a different approach. This has immediate impacts for Canadian companies, as previously our values and interests were championed by the U.S. Canada may face a future where we must go it alone or find other allies on issues important to us. If geopolitics is facing challenges to the status quo, the global economy is also moving into uncharted waters as central banks continue withdrawing all the extra quantitative easing cash they pushed out into the world. Countries that took on too much debt when liquidity was high now face being over-leveraged and unable to meet their debt payment obligations. In 2018, we saw what can happen to economically weak countries like Turkey and Argentina, which relied on cheap financing. The question now is whether this is contained or ushering a wave of sovereign emerging market defaults. China's credit/financial crisis. China's debt for some time now has been growing rapidly. It contends that its strong growth outlook for 2019 results from a rebalancing of the economy and from the government's reform program, rather than from a reliance on debt. And in fact, China's regulators are looking to curb their unmonitored shadow banking sector in order to address imbalances in the financial system. If this process of tightening financial conditions isn't properly managed, however, it could have negative effects on other sectors of China's economy and possibly on Canadian companies doing business there. One risk that has remained on our list for the past few years is the threat of a large cyber attack. With precedents now in the US, France, and the UK, amongst others, the risk of foreign interference into Canada's elections in October is a key risk on policymakers' minds. Canadian companies are also on alert. The Canadian Internet Registration Authority reports that 88% of respondents to its 2018 security survey are worried about the prospect of future cyber attacks, as the average cost of a breach last year was $3.86 million. With America's retreat from its role in international affairs, the guardrails put in place to ensure stability are weakening. There is no longer one arbiter to keep things in check. The risk of interstate war speaks to these preconditions, which EDC Economics believes increase the probability of conflict, whether that be in the South China Sea or between the West and Russia. While conflict on the Korean Peninsula has fallen off our list due to diplomatic efforts, this theater may reignite quickly. Rounding out our top 10 list and a new addition is EU fragmentation. The mood across European capitals is one of trepidation. Europe's strongest leaders over the past decade, Germany's Angela Merkel, is moving on. French President Emmanuel Macron is engulfed by domestic protests, and the UK is immobilized by Brexit. If another Greek financial crisis were to emerge today, who would lead the charge to calm markets and implement a rescue plan? It's no longer just the periphery that is fraying, but the founding members of the EU who are losing faith. The bottom line, the list is scary, but it doesn't do any good to hide from it. Best to manage through a turbulent time and have contingency plans in the event that any of these threats turns into reality, including international financial risk mitigation, EDC's specialty. I'm Ian Tobman. Peter will be back next week.